All right, it's tier list time, and we are taking on Bug Hunter. Um, there's one modification that I need to make to this before we actually get into the discussion, and that's going to be to add one more tier. That's going to be called Combo, and these are going to be for modules that specifically are good against certain enemies and on certain boards. Uh, there's a lot of modules that are going to vary. They may go up a grade based on the rest of your build. Um, those we're just going to solidify on a particular grade, but the ones that really specifically play off of how a board looks or which enemies have evolved, we're going to drop those in combo. And those are ones that are going to typically move more than one grade based on those two specific factors, the enemies that have evolved or what the specific layout that you're on looks like. And we'll get into it more. I do want to use this tier very sparingly because there's a lot that you could kind of drop in here if you're pretty loose on your grading. So we're going to try to stay tight and explain them a little bit more so you have the context you need to understand when you would want to take them. But for everything else, it's going to be a pretty strict grading. We're doing S through D, which means our average tier is B. Our average module is going to end up in the B tier. And what else is there to say? Well, one thing about Bug Hunter and kind of my main philosophy for evaluating units in Bug Hunter is trying to get a full clear every day, right? Um, if you think about how Bug Hunter's set up, you have 5 enemies that you have to kill every day. You have 7 modules. And how many modules does it take to clear a board? That's kind of where you need to start from. And a lot of times it's more than 7. In in a world where you had unlimited modules, you would probably use two per enemy on the board, right? You would use one module to move into place and then a second module to attack. And you could just do that 5 times. And that would be 10 modules, right? So we're kind of looking to come up with a build that has roughly 10 modules worth of ability um, out of our 7 modules, right? So we're trying to get to like, if you want to put a number on it, I would say, we're trying to get to like 10 points out of a 7-point build. That's going to give us the ability to clear stages more frequently and more often. Now, one of the things about Bug Hunter is you can buy modules mid-turn. So you can have a bunch of 1-point modules, and if you can buy 3 more modules in a turn, that gets you up to the 10 that you would need to clear an average board. But if you stick with just the base 7 and can't upgrade those, you're going to fall behind pretty quickly. So that's kind of what we're going to be thinking about in terms of how we rate the specific modules and what they are worth to any particular build. And we'll start with the attacks. We're just going to go in order on the board here of what we have going on. And so that means we start with shoot. So, of course, shoot, it starts in your starting lineup. Uh, shoot is mostly a 1-for-1. You can set up 2-for-1s. It has a range of 2. So you can line up 2 enemies. You can also take out energy cubes, which can chain into multiple reactions, get a 2-for-1 from it that way. Shoot is like 1.5 modules. It's not going to be a 2-for-1 every round. So, I wouldn't say it's like a 2-point module. It's maybe a 1.5, which is going to land it solidly in B tier. Next up is Blast. Blast is another 2-cost module, and it unlocks diagonal attacks over the shoot. And for me, diagonals are one of the biggest things to add to absolutely any build. Diagonals give you such better control over a board, and they can oftentimes act like 2 modules. You know, if you compare shoot, or if you compare blast, it's almost like a combination of a run and a shoot, because it lets you attack 2 up and 2 over, which is the same that you would get from your standard configuration out of a run and a shoot. You know, be able to move up 2 and shoot over 2. You get all that out of one module. So in that way, it's a 2-for-1 for that reason alone. And then you can also get a 2-for-1 because you attack diagonally. Now, it's rare that you get both of those in the same turn, where it counts as where it's acting as two separate modules in addition to getting a 2-for-1, which would be like, you know, essentially a 3-for-1, which would probably have it up in S tier, but it's like a 2.5-for-1 a lot of times, and very solidly a 2-for-1 almost anytime you're going to use it. Plus, it only costs you 2 energy, and 2 energy is our baseline for any of the modules. So if you're talking about replacement value over another shoot or a lob, it's pretty significant in that matter. And so that enough is enough to put it into the A tier. Next up is Snipe. So Snipe is another 2-cost. Of course, you have the range of 5 over the range of 2 for a shoot. So that can play similarly to the blast, right? If we said blast is kind of a combination of a run and a shoot, Snipe can do similar things, but Snipe does not give you the diagonals. So its ability to act as a run and a shoot is slightly more limited. I have it as like a 1.5-for-1, which is very close to what shoot is. And often it is a slight upgrade over a shoot, but Snipe does not get to the quality of blast. It is another 2 energy, and it is worth replacing a shoot, but often doesn't give you quite the versatility that you would get out of bringing a blast onto the team. And so that's going to keep it in the B range, although it is the highest B. Does not quite make it out of the Bs. All right, next up is Annihilate. Annihilate is another 4 energy, 4-cost module. And so when we get into the 4 costs, there's going to be a high comparison to the 2-cost modules, because I could have 2 2-cost modules. So if we say that something like Blast is worth a run and a shoot, this is worth a run and a snipe, but you pay retail for it, right? That would cost you 4. A run would cost you 2, and a snipe would cost you 2. So is it actually better than having the run and the snipe? Well, it would have to be better than having the run and the snipe every single time that you use it. And if it's not, then you're getting even less efficiency than either of those. And even though it adds a theoretical maximum to your 7 units, it's to your 7 modules, it's not enough and not consistently enough that I end up putting it in the C tier. There are going to be times where this is going to save your butt, where it's in the shop and you can set up a situation where you get a 3-for-1 by having it, but they're just not on every board. And the situations where it does happen are great, but the variability of it and the initial cost of 4 energy is going to keep it down in the C tier for me. Okay, next up is lob. And so now we're getting into the discrete attacks, the ones that go after a particular square instead of a particular line of squares. So we lose the 2-for-1 abilities of all the modules that we looked at so far. We lose the ability to be able to attack on 2 squares of enemies. You do still have the ability to attack an energy cube, and the energy cubes can get those chains, but you can't just line up 2 enemies and take them out with 1 lob. And because of that, it is going to fall behind the similar continuous attacks. So I do have it below shoot. It is still in the B tier because being able to attack on different heights is important to have in your lineup. And the fact that it only costs 2 is also very useful, but still not enough to get it out of the Bs. And losing the versatility of being able to hit multiple units, multiple enemies, is going to put it towards the bottom of the Bs for me. Which brings us to throw, which falls into the same evaluation. It's another 2 cost unit, and the fact that you get the diagonals, again, for me, diagonals are everything. That's going to be enough to put in the A tier. You could potentially argue that it's top of B tier, but I think the diagonal, unlocking your diagonals is enough that I move it into the A tier, because the first one of these is massively important. The second lob style attack, discrete attack that you can pick up is going to make some pretty dramatic changes to how much board space that you can cover in any given round. And so that's enough to get it into the A tier for me. After that, we have launch. So, in a way, launch looks just like an upgrade to the throw. It lets you hit things a knight's move away instead of only on the diagonals. But you pay significantly for it. It costs 4 energy. And so if our baseline unit is 2 energy, it needs to be able to do twice as much. And how often does it do twice as much? Well, not very often. I have this in C tier. I think it's pretty close to Annihilate. And I think for me, being able to hit those off squares, the knight's move away squares, is enough to put it above Annihilate, but not enough to get it out of C tier. So it's going to be in C tier, but it'll be the highest C tier attack. Next up is Detonate. And so Detonate is another 4 cost, so pretty high barrier to start, but it detonates an energy cube at any location. So one of the tricky things about Detonate is it's the cost, really. The fact that it costs 4 means you've taken 4 energy cubes off the board already, so the first time that you take it, it's going to have limited options as to where you can attack. Requires a lot of setup in that way for it to be particularly good. But it has significant advantages on range. Kind of, you think about launch, and launch, of course, has a range of 2, but Whereas this is much closer to Annihilate. Annihilate's range of 5. But the being able to attack an energy can be slightly limiting as to what you can hit, but detonate, it just kind of does everything. The hitting energy is great. I love attacking energy. It gets you some of your best value moves. Being able to either chain multiple energy attacks or just to increase your range in a way that almost no other attack can do. And for all of those reasons, I have it in the B's. I have it just below the snipe. Snipe being a 2 cost and usually getting about the same amount of value is why it's going to end up in the B's. The fact that it costs 4, it's actually pretty impressive that it makes all the way up to B. Yeah. But attacking energy is great. Having a large range is great. I'm all for it. It does require a tiny little bit of setup, but really not that much. Yeah. Next up is ERUPT. So ERUPT is going to be the first thing that I'm putting in the combo tier because ERUPT attacks all locations adjacent to a hole. And that's not going to be good on every board. It's going to be good against specific enemies, of course. And every third stage, maybe you'll have something that has a setup where it's going to be good. But that's not nearly enough for me to actually be able to give it a grade. If I was going to give it a grade, it'd probably end up in D. But when it's good, it's going to be like closer to the B range. And so with that in mind, I'm just going to drop it into combo. Yeah, you'll know when it's good, and if you don't know when it's good, just don't pick it. Next up is Radiate. Radiate attacks all locations adjacent to you, and it costs 3. And what else? What is there to say about Radiate? Well, the range is bad. The range is the worst out of all these. It's worse than our initial attacks. It also makes it tricky because if you're leaving energy on the board, if you're not clearing energy out first, you can often be in a scenario where you could get a 2-for-1, but there's an energy too close, and now you can't use this attack at all. So it's hard to set up. It's a little pricey at 3, and if you're keeping a relatively clear board, you often need to spend multiple movements in order to get this to work, as opposed to, some of our attacks that just have the better range to set up a 2-for-1. This is setting up a 2-for-1 and often requires multiple moves to make it happen, which makes a 2-for-1 more like a 2-for-2, right? If you have to use a whole move just to get into a place where this can get you a 2-for-1. And even then, it's not consistent. So I have it in the C's. In fact, it's possibly a D. I have it at the bottom of the C's. I think it's slightly. It's good enough, but it does require a little bit more work than I'm typically willing to put in for an attack, especially when there's such better and cheaper attacks that are often available. Even more expensive attacks that have a little bit more versatility, in my opinion. Okay, next up is Bombard. Bombard costs 4 and attacks all elevated locations. So that goes in the combo tier for me. Not necessarily a combo with other units, but a combo with specific board states and specific enemies. It just is a little too variable for me and for the cost. If I was going to rank it, it'd probably end up in the C's. But there are specific setups where it goes as high as A. And so instead of just dropping it in like B tier, because I don't think it's ever a B, I think it is often an A or a C or a D. And the fact that it can jump so wildly across those, just depending on what enemies have evolved, is what this combo tier is for. Next up is Burst. Burst costs any egg to explode and it costs you 4 energy. This is our first D. It costs 4, right? So it needs to be at least twice as good as a 2 tier, and it's often not even as good as the B tiers because destroying eggs only gets rid of eggs. It doesn't actually add on any kills for your total. So you're dedicating an entire slot to not actually moving your progress forward any. The fact that it costs 4 energy, if you would just spend that 4 energy for an attack the turn previous, just spent 2 of that 4 energy maybe that you had to save up over 2 turns and bought an additional attack, chances are you would have been able to kill another unit and not spawn an egg in the first place. So this is a very last-ditch effort kind of play and really just doesn't have the payoff. And so that's going to land it solidly in D tier. And the last attack we have is Engage. So Engage costs 4 and it refreshes whenever you change elevation. So this is kind of build specific. If you have modules that let you change elevation frequently, you can get a lot of use out of this. But it's hard to set up and it costs 4 energy. And all those things combined, for me, goes to the D tier. I think you can just do better. I think you're better off spending your energy in chunks of 2. And I think that often pays off at least as much, if not more, than you would get out of just taking the Engage. I think even if you just took shot twice and were able to shoot 2 more times, I think that is going to get you at least as much, if not more, than you would out of an Engage without a very specific build around. And, maybe the trickiest part about that is if the other parts of the build around that you would need to make Engage work, you need to have before you get the Engage. So Engage would already need to be in the shop. You would need to get a couple extra modules that let you change elevation, and then you would pick up the Engage. And it's just a lot of setup for a pretty middling attack module. Our goal is not to have all shoots. Our goal is to have all things that are better than shoot. So even if this makes all of our a bunch of our other movements into shoots, then I just don't think it's worth the slot. Okay, so that's all of our attacks. Possibly notable that none of them make it into S tier. Let's see if any of the movement modules can get into S tier. Spoiler alert, they can't. The first thing that we have is run. And one of the first things that you're going to note, even though these have the same range and the same continuous versus discrete targeting that you get out of the attacks, they are typically going to fall a full grade behind on all the attacks because the attacks are much easier to set up 2-for-1s. And if we're trying to get to that 10 units a turn, you need more 2-for-1s. So the fact that these are often not 2-for-1s, in fact, they're sometimes don't even provide a kill. You can get a kill out of any movement, but they're harder to set up. So whereas the attacks you're setting up to make a 2-for-1, the movements you're setting up to make a 1-for-1. And when they don't meet that bar, they fall underneath, which means they're less than a module. So you, again, back to our framework of trying to hit 10 modules worth, the movements are less than a module. Most of the time, they're going to be worth less than one module. And that means that they're below average. So they're going to end up in C. Run ends up being a C. And hop. Now, the fact that you only start with one hop and changing elevation is pretty important to making your other movements actually get into the 1-for-1 range. The discrete movements, the ones that let you change height, are going to be typically higher. And so that's an interesting flop from the attacks. Whereas the attacks, you want to be able to set up the 2-for-1s, and that's why the straight attack, the continuous attacks are better. Being able to change heights is going to be more valuable often than just the continuous movements. So these are both C tier, but the hop I actually have above the run. Next up is dash, and very similar to the attacks, the diagonal that you get out of a run is essentially 2 modules worth, right? Now, it's not quite as high of a ceiling because with 2 movement modules, in theory, you could get a 1-for-1 out of both of those. You're not going to get 2 1-for-1s worth out of a dash, right? You're never going to kill 2 bugs with a dash. But you do get 2 movements worth, which is slightly less than a 1-for-1. You know, like maybe this is like a 0.8 to the 0.1, but you get 2 of those, right? So it's like 1.5, which is going to put it into the B tier. I'm just going to group these by types. I think it's probably less important, more important to know how they line up within the other movements than they would compared to the attack specifically. But it gets you slightly above 1 module's worth of movement, and that's going to land it right into the B tier. And then from there, we have, I guess we can finish the continuous ones. So we have sprint. Sprint is, again, 1 tier below the attack equivalent. You know, the extra range is nice, but it's not necessarily double what you would get out of the continuous movements with 2 range. Sometimes it's only like half of a module better than this, which still makes it a 1-for-1 a lot of the times. More consistently, you know, maybe there is possibly an argument that this is like the bottom B tier movement, but I have it as the top C tier. Next up is zoom. Zoom is 4 energy, and a lot of the same things that we talked about with the attack. Zoom lets you cover a lot of ground. You know, zoom does often get you 2 modules, 2 movement modules worth of ground clear, potentially even like 3 or 4. But since the average is 2, it's actually going to be slightly higher than the equivalent attack. You know, because this could be as much as 4 movements worth of move. That's enough to have it slightly higher for me. Even though you don't get the multiple kills, I do find that the payoff is greater than the equivalent attack. So while most of these have been a full grade behind, I actually have it on par. And this is kind of where the movements even up with the attacks. For me at least. So jump is next. We get into the discrete movement abilities. And same thing, similar to the dash, right? It is still one below, but the diagonals, again, unlocking the diagonals, in my opinion, is going to be one of the best things that you can do for your build. Getting 2 units worth consistently is very important. Maybe it's even supposed to be like this. That's I could see an argument there that it is better than the dash. If it's the first movement module that you're upgrading, I do think it's probably more important to pick the jump than the dash as your first upgrade, and that's for a lot of the same reasons that hop would be higher over your standard run. But there is a fall off. If you have 3 of 3 units, let's say I have an option for either 2 dashes and a jump or 2 jumps and a dash. I think having the 2 dashes would be slightly higher. So with that in mind, I put the dash just above the jump, but they're both B tier. Pretty close overall. Okay, next up is Vault. And Vault is another one that costs 4. But, the extra squares works very similar to the zoom. The zoom gets you like 4-ish movements. The hop doesn't get, or the vault doesn't get you quite the 4-ish movements that you would get out of the zoom. But the fact that vault lets you do the knight's move and lets you get stomps in areas that would otherwise take you 2 moves gets it, something like a 3 for 1. And since one of those is a kill, I do have it slightly above, and you'll see that actually mirrors the attacks. I find the knight's move and really just being able to clear, to cover more ground, right? A lot of Bug Hunter is about how much ground you can clear in one turn, since you never get to control where the bugs spawn. You just have to be able to get to those spots. And so, as one of the few modules that can let you move a knight's move away with a single module, it gets the nod of being slightly higher. Again, the cost is the biggest thing that keeps it from going up to B tier, that keeps it into the C tier. If you have 2 different discrete movements, it's very easy to set up 2 discrete movements that get you the same outcome. And the fact that this doesn't get you those same 2 discrete movements every time, instead only gets you the one, makes me place it below your standard 2 energy moves, but still keeps it into the C tier. And yeah, so let's keep going. Next up, we have some of our specialty movements. The first one is Warp. Warp costs 3 energy, and it moves you to any location with an energy cube. So it costs 3, but every time you use it, you get at least 1 energy cube back. So you buy it and immediately use it and get another energy. So it really kind of only costs you 2. And you get an additional rebate after that every time that you use it. And that's I mean, that's massive. It's halfway towards another module that you get to buy. And so that alone is huge. It also lets you change heights, which is huge. It is discrete movement. You don't get to push or you don't get to push enemies. You don't get to stomp enemies. But the distances that you get to move and the fact that you get to pick up energy and the combos that it has with other potential modules that we'll get to in a little bit give this just an absolute ton of versatility. And for that reason, Warp is my first A-level movement. Next up is Transport. Transport moves to any elevated location. And this is another 3 cost, but the versatility is unmatched. You get to move anywhere. It sets you up for stomping on enemies. It gets you, honestly, it gets you everything that you would want out of one of these hot long distance moves. You know, it gets a wide coverage, and it puts you in, it puts you on the high ground. You know, and what else are you trying to do with a move except get the high ground or use the high ground to turn into a kill, right? So this gets you the high ground, which can set up a kill, and it gets you the range that you would get out of any of these other moves. So that for me is enough to put in the A tier, and I put it actually just above the warp. You know, these are both close. I could see an argument to swap these around, but I think they're both solidly in the A tier. Then we have Tunnel. Tunnel is another combo. It's our only combo move. It costs 3 and lets you move to any location adjacent to a hole. Obviously requires some specific setups. One thing that's kind of rough about Tunnel is one of the best uses for holes is pushing enemies into a hole. And since Tunnel puts you next to a hole, it doesn't set that up. So having a move that is specific to having holes on the board without actually setting you up for the best move to the best thing to do with a hole is kind of unfortunate. It really doesn't take advantage of those holes. It kind of acts like these two, which may make it feel like it should be higher. But I have it in combo tier, and that may actually be generous. Personally, how I like to build and the builds that I prefer to play, it just stays in D tier. But I do know that there is potential, and it does give you some additional range. That said, I don't think it ever quite matches the 2 that are in A tier. I think at best this gets to B tier, and like I said, for my personal tastes, it's a D tier module. But that's just me, and I know it has potential outside of that, so I'll just put it in combo for the ratings, just to try to be, you know, to cover all experiences and not just mine. All right, we're on to the last movement, and it's maneuver, and it says whenever you kill a bug, it refreshes, but it costs 4. And just like with our attack with engage, where's engage? Oh, right, in the D's. So just like with the engage, you know, you're buying a reusable version of a suboptimal module, right? It's getting you a C tier module. You're paying twice as much for a C tier module in hopes that you get to use it multiple times. The biggest difference here is that it's easier to trigger multiple times, where the engage uh, I find to be much more difficult to trigger in multiple times to get that full value, to get 4 energies worth that you have to spend on it in the first place. The maneuver is a lot easier to generate that value. Plus, maneuver can trigger maneuver because it's just whenever you kill a bug. It's not whenever you use an attack on a bug. So if you use maneuver to squash a bug, you get to maneuver again. So with that in mind, it actually brings itself up to the B tier. The fact that you can chain it, the fact that you can use other modules to change heights, like our A tier movement, and then squash and be able to re-enable it, gives it a lot more versatility than you get out of a similar thing with an attack. Yeah, and so that is all of the movement. I think it's interesting how you start out with the more basic movements are worse than the same basic attacks, but in the end, the more specialty movements are significantly better than the specialty attacks. I think it's interesting to see how that balances out. Just a neat little quirk of how that all works out. All right, so let's move on to the specials. So you don't start with any specials in your lineup. It's just moves and attacks, and you could go through with no specials, just moves and attacks, and still be able to take out any board. And in a way, it's there's a reason that I made the combo tag blue, and not only because the limited colors available on the tier list, but when you think about it, these are largely combo pieces, right? And they're enabling you to get better use out of your attacks and your moves. So a lot of these can be pretty varied depending on what the rest of your setup is. But a lot of them enable you to get more value out of your attacks and your moves. And that is ultimately what we're going for, right? We're trying to hit that 10 units worth out of our 7-unit lineup. And this is going to turn on some of the ones that we were talking about that may be, sometimes they're a 2-for-1, sometimes they're a 4-for-1. The special moves are going to make it more reliable that you get higher value out of all your attacks and your moves. And so the more important ones are going to be, and the higher graded ones are going to be the ones that enable better attacks and better moves more consistently. So with that said, let's start with resupply. Resupply adds an energy cube to any open location. Okay. And so there should be some obvious things that are already starting to jump out. Look at some of our A tier movements and some of our highest attacks. They rely on having energy cubes. So being able to take something that would otherwise be random, the energy distribution is random at the beginning of every turn. Resupply gives you control over that. Resupply also lets you pick up extra energy every turn. So it costs 2 energy to pick up, but it can immediately return one of those energies to you and get you an additional energy every turn forward after that, whether you use it for attacks. Honestly, one of the best things with this is being able to put it near another energy and chain energy blowing up into another energy, into a potential 2-for-1, 3-for-1. The possibilities on this one are absolutely massive, and that's going to put it pretty squarely in A tier. You know what? There's arguments that it could even go up to S tier, I don't quite have it that high, but it is a very good A tier unit. And, if you're only going to have one special, if you're going for a kind of a middle of the road build with 3 moves, 3 attacks, and 1 special, there are very few that I would take over the resupply. I think it's going to round out almost any combination of moves and attacks in a way that allows you to get extra value from all of your modules every turn. Next up is Shift, and Shift lowers the ground in one spot and raises it in another, and it costs 2 energy. And one of the things that we talked about with a lot of the movements is that a movement on its own is not worth a full module because it doesn't deal with, it doesn't get you a kill, right? If you can make a movement module generate a kill, it goes up in value. So that's a lot of the reason that the movements are lower than the attacks, because the attacks generate more kills than the movements do. And what Shift does is enables your your movements to generate kills more often, and it lets you have movements. It just gives all of your movements, an extra, I don't know, half a module worth of value to every movement that you have just from having the shift. And you get to shift 2 squares. Shifting 2 squares is kind of insane. Makes it like 2 modules on its own. I would, if shift only did one, either move a square up or a square down, it would be a B. So the fact that it does 2 every time, it puts it into the S tier for me. If I only pick up 1 special module, it's shift. It's just so much value every single time that you have it. The earlier you get it, the better as well, which is huge because it only costs 2 energy. You can pick up shift on day 1 and have the board completely transformed by the time that you're done. And you can very easily turn this into multiple kills consistently. It's absolutely one of the best modules that you can take, and I always look for shift lines, and I'm consistently trying to pick up shift if it's in the shop. Okay, next up is Power Up. Power Up is another 4-cost module and says until your next rest, you can destroy bugs by moving into them. And this is a little bit of a build around. You do want a decent amount of moves, of course, to be able to get full use out of it. And there's a lot of versatility in it. Again, one of the big reason that the movement modules are overall a tier lower than the attack modules of the same type are because it's harder to get kills out of them, and it's harder to get 2-for-1s out of them. Almost impossible to get a 2-for-1 kill out of a movement module. But when you can destroy bugs by moving into them, suddenly it makes all of your movement modules move up almost a full tier. Now, it does cost 4, which is pretty significant. And it doesn't give you the range that you would get out of moving and then attacking. So sometimes you still need more than 1 move to actually get into place to set this up. But it's still really good. There's a lot of builds that you can put together that do take good use out of this, and it's one of those things that when you see it in the shop, maybe instead of immediately picking up a 3rd attack, you instead can kind of save up and pick up this instead of getting that additional attack. And, you know, it works very much like an attack module and helps turn on your movement modules. And again, a lot of this game is about covering as much board space as possible. So when you have your diagonal moves, it's going to help turn those into diagonal attacks. And it's going to give you a lot of versatility. One of the better 4-cost modules for sure. Easily a solid B. Okay, next is Collect. Collect is another 2 energy module. And Collect lets you pick up energy from around the board. It picks up an energy cube and all cubes adjacent to it. Cost 2, but again, like our move here and our resupply, it gets you a rebate and it only costs 2 to start. So this is like a 1-cost module, which is absolutely insane. And sometimes it acts like a 0-cost module. And the earlier you get it, the better it is because it's going to collect even more energy every round. Now, there is a balance because being able to attack energy is one of the best ways to get 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s on any given board. So clearing out extra energy in those scenarios, not great. You know, you're taking away your options. But having more energy to be able to spend on more modules is exactly what we're trying to do. You know, we've already talked about how you want to get to like 10-ish modules. This is like essentially a free module every turn. With versatility rolled into it. So with that in mind, I have this as the top of the B tier. I think it is one of the better things that you can get. I think it just lets you build towards a module collection that can easily clear any board faster than any other module can. Even though it is it's not a kill and it's not a move, which is, you know, kind of what all this is based on. You know, how good they are at killing bugs. This is the one that breaks the mold because it lets you buy more modules, which let you kill more bugs. And so every turn that you have this essentially adds 1. It's a very much a cumulative effect. Every time that you collect, you're essentially upgrading another module. And so if you can get a collect on day 1, it's like having +1 module every round. So there is a little bit of a slow burn, right? Because you buy it and you're down 1 module for that turn. And then the next turn you're even because it lets you buy a module, but that's only making up for the slot that it's taking itself. But then the turn after that, you're +1 module. And the turn after that, you're +1 module. So there is a cumulative effect, and you do need to get it early to maximize it. Although, you know, sometimes when the board is a little bit more full, maybe there's a handful of squares that have 2 energy, you can take this and it actually does make up for the turns that you didn't have it. And, you know, you get 4 or 5 energy in one shot and get to upgrade 2 modules in, you know, from a C tier module to an A or a B tier module twice in one turn. And it immediately replaces its the small amount of energy that you had to spend on it. Yeah, so I have it in B tier. It's my top B tier module. I could see arguments for bringing it into the A tier, but there is you know, there's a lot to be said about being able to attack energy, and I feel that giving up some of that versatility is what keeps it out of the A tier, but very, very good. And, you know, again, if you only pick up one special module, you can do much worse. All right, next up is Barrage, and Barrage says it refreshes all of your attack modules. It costs 4, and yeah, we said you want to try to get to 10, right? So a lot of these specials, they cost you a slot, which means you have to get 10 out of 6 modules now instead of getting it out of 7, because the actual value of this module is 0. It's a dead slot because it doesn't kill anything and it doesn't move you anywhere on the board. But it lets you reuse your other modules. So you go down to 6, but you get to double up on all of your other modules. So it's very much tied into how good the rest of your build is. But it's not that difficult to build around, and having 3 attacks that you get to double up on can very easily make up for the one module that you're losing, especially if you're replacing something that's like a C tier module. You get to replace a C tier module with, say, an A tier and 2 B tier modules, which would be worth it every time. The attack, we'll get to it, but and actually we'll do both at the same time. Accelerate is the other one here, and it refreshes all your movement modules. It also costs 4. I have Accelerate slightly above Barrage, okay, but only very slightly, because I find that the extra movements are a little bit more advantageous because you can get away with less. And because the A tier movements are so good, I think that your diagonal move, or being able to teleport multiple times, is going to make up for more than you would to be able to have the extra attacks. The attacks are still based on how much you actually get to move around, and having a variety of attacks, I find to be slightly more important than having the variety of moves. Being able to use the same movement twice, I find, has a slightly higher return than to be able to use the same attack twice. But not much. They still are both solid B tier, and again, very much in the range of, if you only have one special, that it's hard to do a lot worse than any of these B tiers. All right, next up is Maximize. Maximize says until your next rest, move and attack modules have maximum range, and it costs 4. And in a way, it kind of looks like Barrage and Accelerate. It takes these modules that would otherwise be a 1-for-1 and moves them up. But, you'll notice that your standard move and your unlimited range move are still in the same tier. So whereas Barrage and Accelerate take a basic move and double it up, Maximize takes a B tier movement, a B tier, and makes it just a slightly better B tier. So instead of having 2 B tiers, you just have one slightly better B tier at the cost of 2 slots. It also is the sort of thing that once you have any of these higher level movements or attacks, the actual return that you get out of this is lower, right? So it works with less modules, whereas these are a little bit more versatile. They work with every module. Maximize does not work with as many modules, and even though it does attacks and moves, it can be harder to get the full value out of it. And even let's look at movement, because I think the movements are actually more important uh, than the attacks here. A, a run that can go 5 spaces is still in the same tier, whereas using the same run twice upgrades it a full tier, right? The dash is a full tier better than the run, and that's because it lets you go in 2 different directions. This keeps you moving in one direction. So the payoff is greater if you already have the diagonals available to you, but if you have not unlocked your diagonals yet and you're still working with your basic run and hop, it's going to be worse than just picking up your first diagonal movement. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave it in combo, because there are setups that it is going to be excessively good, but they're going to vary greatly. And for me personally, I don't take it. I have it in the D tier, but there are setups where it can go significantly higher. But they require changing out so much of your build that by the time you get there, you know what? I'm actually just going to put it in D, because by the time you get there, by the time you replace everything with the diagonals to be able to take full advantage of this, I just don't think it's worth the 4 energy that it would cost you to use it in the first place. Okay, what's next? Next up is dig, and dig costs 4 and digs a hole adjacent to a hole that already exists, and you can dig under bugs. So a lot of these specials don't actually kill bugs on their own. This one does, but it's going to go with the rest of the other hole specific units, and it's going to just find itself right in the combo tier. After that is Intensify. Intensify says until your next rest, whenever you attack a bug, that bug explodes, and it costs 4. So Intensify has some uses. But for me, it's the cost that holds it back. Turning bugs into explosions, chaining explosions with energy, in my opinion, is one of the strongest things that you can do in the game. It's one of the easiest ways to get 2-for-1s. It's one of the easiest ways to clear boards out. And that puts Intensify, the ability of Intensify, pretty high, because it lets you change bugs. Instead of just being able to chain energy, it lets you chain on more board states than you would otherwise. But if you're keeping a clear board, it's less useful. And if you I think that's really about it. If you're keeping a clear board, Intensify is not great, and it costs 4. And if you just spent that 4 energy for an extra move and an extra attack, or an upgraded attack and an upgraded move, I think you can often get the same return without the potential downfall of putting yourself into the line of fire, right? So in some ways, it's better on certain boards. If you have a board with a lot of mixed elevation, it's possible that the Intensify is going to be better than just simply upgrading an attack, but it is kind of niche. I don't, and in that way, you could make an argument that it is a combo piece. But I don't think, for me, there's enough else going on there. And the cost is just a little bit too much for me. So that's going to have me keep it in C tier. Next up is Devolve. Reverts any bug and all bugs adjacent to it into larva form. It also works on eggs. So you can devolve eggs and be able to get kills out of them again, which is nice. It costs 3. And, as a solution to eggs, vastly superior than our other solution to eggs. If you have to pick one of these two as a way to deal with eggs, Devolve is going to pay you off so much better because it lets you get kills. And so that enough is going to put it into the C range because it does turn on more kills. But it doesn't come anywhere near as close as Barrage or Accelerate to turning on kills. And I find it to be around the same range as Intensify, as being able to turn on additional kills. It buys time, but you're limited in time anyway. You only have so many turns to work. So if all you're doing is stalling and not killing, I think the best that's going to get you is a C for me. Okay, next is Spray. Spray, you get to target 2 open locations and prevent bugs from spawning there. And it costs 2 energy. So Spray is kind of niche. There are boards that Spray can manipulate. It's good against certain enemies. It's good against the dragon flooshes of the world. It helps corral everyone into a smaller location. And if you're using this in combination with a board that has a lot of holes, you can really put a very tight limit on where enemies can spawn, makes some moves better. You can use it to get in a spot where your 5 range attack is going to be massively more useful. So you could call it a combo. I think it's actually just a D. There's just not enough boards that it works on. And even when you have the combo-ish things going, it does still rely on certain evolutions. And what can I say? It doesn't take anything out on its own. So that's going to land it in the D tier for me. After that, we have Replenish. Replenish is a 4 energy module, and it delivers 4 more energy cubes to the board. And I know you're looking at Resupply right now up in the A tier, and you're going, well, it does 4 times as much as Resupply. It's got to be an S tier, right? But the fact that it's similar to the opening move of randomly generating 4 energy, I find it a little bit too hard to use, and it can often hurt you as much as it helps you, and it costs 4 energy. So it does have uses, right? So I'm not going to put it all the way down in D tier, but it is going to be at the bottom of the C's for me. I know some people like it, and it does have the ability to pay you back. And honestly, those are just keeping it out of the D range. But for me, those are not enough to get it above that and anywhere near the C range. Anywhere better than the C range. Okay, next is Recharge. Recharge lets you refresh modules to the left and right of this one. So we've talked a little bit about how some of the specials are, they don't add a module on their own. Or to say they're not worth a module on their own. Essentially giving you 6 modules to get your 10 points out of. And they just need to increase those other ones. So in that way, it's kind of similar to your barrages and your accelerates. For me, it's significantly better than the maximize. Maximize is the other kind of comparison that it enhances both categories, an attack and a move. You don't get quite as many uses as you do from an accelerate and a barrage, but I think the versatility of it, the fact that you get um, 2 units and you get to choose what those units are, whether it's 2 moves or 2 attacks or a move and an attack, uh, puts recharge for me in the A tier. In fact, I might even have it above resupply. This is one of the few modules that makes you think about the order of your modules, which more so than some of the modules that want you to have a specific build with an overload of specific modules. This only asks that you put a little bit of thought into where you put specific modules. And for me, it's pretty simple. All you do is if your goal is to first turn one movement into an attack, you just put that attack in module 1. And then the first upgraded movement, you put in module 3. And if you get a recharge, you just drop it in module 2 into slot 2. And I really don't think that you need to think about it a whole lot more than that. And you just leave modules 1 and 3 as a good attack and a good move, and then upgrade module 2 last. If you want to upgrade another move, you upgrade the move in module 4. And you can just leave module 2 open for the possibility of dropping a recharge in there. And it costs 4, but for me, it's worth it every time. You essentially go +1 module. It takes you from a 7 module build to an 8 module build. And that is worth it. And it pays off every round. That extra module would cost you 2 energy. So this essentially gains you 2 energy per day. And potentially even more, because if you're refreshing 2 movements, not only are you getting 2 energy worth from being able to reuse a module, 2 modules every turn, but if you're reusing movements to get more energy, it gets you 2 more for the extra slot and whatever you pick up. So it's like a module and a half, maybe, making it like close to a 3 for 1. Very similar to how we talked about some of these higher tier attacks in versatility. And so recharge, basically one of the highest specialty moves that you can get. One of the best things that you can get for almost any build. Okay, next up is invert. Invert lowers all elevated locations and raises all non-elevated locations, which you could say is combo tier. It is going to vary by board how helpful this particular module is going to be. But it turns on kills out of so many of your attacks, very much in the same vein as shift turns on many of your attacks, many of your movements to also garner kills. For me, that's enough to take it out of the combo. In fact, I have it all the way up in the A's. I think it is one of the best ways to increase the value of all of your moves. And if it takes 3 of your moves from the C range and makes them into the B range, that for me is worth a full slot. Especially because it can take a B range up to an A range module, right? So you're taking C's to A's and B's, or C's to B's and B's to A's, and it happens to do that for multiple modules every turn, that's going to put it up in the A range for me. And even though it does, it only costs 2 energy as well. It's one of the cheaper ones. Like recharge costs 4, and invert is 2. And I've gone over multiple times of how big of a difference that is. This could be 2 different modules. This only costs you 1 module. And what you get for it is easily worth the 2 energy and the slot that it's going to cost you. All right, Traverse is next, another 2 energy module, and it says until your next rest, you can freely move across walls. So what does it do? Basically, it doubles the usage of your continuous movement moves. Gets you some extra versatility on some of the craggier boards with like lots of different heights. It makes your movement modules just that much better. But I don't think it's worth a slot. I don't think it is quite enough payoff for taking up a full slot. I honestly don't know what else to say about it, but for me, it's in the D tier. It just doesn't give you enough payoff for the slot. That's all there is to it for me. Right down in the D's. So let's just keep moving on to aim. We're almost done here. We got 2 left. Aim says until your next rest, you can freely attack across walls. So it's the attack version of Traverse, and it costs 2 energy. So, maybe there is a world where if you combined aim and Traverse into a maximize type effect, that it might be worth a slot. The fact that these 2 are single, both take up a single slot, are gonna drop them right into the D range for me. It's just a little bit too hard to get enough value out of it to justify the slot, and the return on them just is not there consistently enough turn after turn. Okay, so last module, and that's going to be Scatter. Forces all bugs to move to a random nearby space, and it costs 5. And Scatter is going to go down here with the rest of the holes. It's another combo piece. It's good if there's holes because you can basically force bugs to commit suicide. And if you can't, there's combos with bug spray to help make that a little bit more viable. But then we're talking about taking a bad unit just to make another unit good, which would typically put it in kind of like the D range for me. But I think there's enough versatility that maybe you can take it and not need to have bad modules to make it work. But it's also incredibly expensive and just doesn't have the kind of payoff that you need out of these specialty units, especially since even though it does come up with the ability to make kills on its own, it just doesn't do quite enough for me to justify the cost or the slot space. Yeah, so that's where I fall on Bug Hunter. Really curious to see what everyone thinks and if there's modules that you have higher or lower. Yeah, but otherwise, happy hunting and good luck out there in the quarry.